Thank you for tuning in today, everyone. Today, we are delighted to introduce you to Mike Jones. Now, Mike Jones is the founder of Better Happy. He's a former intelligence analyst and physical training instructor for the British military. Now, he's completed 2 tours of Afghanistan attached to this special boat service and has also spent 2 years living in monasteries in Nepal and Thailand. Now, after experiencing burnout in his first business, he founded Better Happy to help businesses and their leadership teams create healthy, high-performance cultures. Now, we're excited to have this conversation today. So without further ado, a big hello to the modest, driven, and passionate Mike Jones. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. You're making me feel, you're making me blush with that introduction.
Well, listen, I think it doesn't do you justice. So tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, just from your standpoint, because it's always fun when somebody else is reading your bio, but you tell our listeners a bit more about you.
Yeah, sure. So obviously my name's Mike. I'm an absolute legend. No, I'm only joking. I was just playing with the modest thing. So my professional career started in the army. I was born and bred in the UK. I joined the army because I didn't really know what to do with myself. I didn't join the army out of passion or anything like that. I kind of didn't really engage in school, came out of school, thought, what am I going to do in my life? And all my friends went to university, and one day I had a hangover and I just thought, I'm going to have to do something. So I went and signed up to the army because it felt maybe like it'd be something that I enjoy because I was into my fitness. So that's how my professional career started. And then somehow I ended up in the intelligence corps. So they obviously saw something in me that they liked. And that led me onto a really cool journey of working with the special forces and going to Afghanistan. But I did that for 5 years. And then I did like back-to-back tours of Afghan. So basically spent a year in Afghanistan. And high stress job, high pressure, high stress, 20 hour days, things like that. And after I'd been the second time, I was like, I'm just going to keep getting sent back out here, and it's not what I want. And actually, the military wasn't very aligned to my values. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew I was unhappy. I didn't know a lot about values at that age, so 20 to 25. So then I decided to come out, and I came home for 3 days, and then bought a one-way ticket to Thailand. And did 3 years backpacking in search of something. I didn't know what it was, but I was in search of something. And then that took me to monasteries in Thailand and Nepal. I read a book called The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama, which is probably one of the most pivot-changing moments of my life. And then from there came back to the UK with the goal of making a difference. And I did, before I started Better Happy, I did actually have another business, which was a gym. And got really burnt out in that. So learned more about mental health from owning a business than I did from spending months living on monasteries, which is interesting. But ultimately, it all kind of led me to where I am now. And it's that classic story of, or belief, that everything happens for a reason. And when you look back at stuff, even the stuff that you didn't like I wouldn't wish burnout on anybody. It's a horrible thing to go through, and really it led to me to being in depression. But actually, if I hadn't had that experience, I wouldn't be where I am now, connected to the people that I am now, having the experiences that I get to have now, and owning the business that I do now. So it has all led me onto this journey where I'm like, okay, all of that happened for a reason. So
it all looks clear when we're looking back, doesn't it? You can see those dots connecting. It's so much easier to say everything happens for a reason when you've got that level of perspective, isn't it?
Yeah. Hindsight's a lovely thing.
Isn't it just? And it's quite a stark contrast from the military to monasteries. Especially in terms of the stressful environments. Like, the military is a high stress environment, and most people never have experience kind of that level of stress from a military perspective as well. How did you cope with that while you were in there?
There's 2 things I'd say to that, and the first one is, I would say, hand on heart, that owning a business I found more stressful than being in the military. I found owning my first business especially more stressful than being in Afghanistan. So that's something that's worth exploring. And what kept me going, especially, in fact, throughout the whole of my military career, the thing that kept me going, and I don't know if it's just my psychology and how I function, but I know the thing that kept me going was building routines, especially in Afghanistan. I went from the first time I went, it was a real struggle, And it took me about 3 months to get into a routine of training, and look, all the stuff you'd expect someone to say, looking after myself, looking after my health, giving myself downtime. But after I'd figured out that routine, I actually started to almost enjoy my time there, because the routine gives you sanity. But before I had that, I was going out of my mind and kind of thinking about how long I had left and how long the days were. But as soon as I found the routine that worked for me and a kind of cadence, actually it all worked pretty well. And that's a theme that I've seen throughout my life, actually.
John is like the king of routine.
I do love a good routine. It keeps everything in perspective.
I'm the opposite.
Really, that surprises me because you're so organized.
It's organized chaos. I'm telling you, mate.
I do think as well, you need to break your routine, don't you? So you can get so stuck in your routine that you start to feel a bit flat. But then it's complicated, because then you could say, well, how often do you need to break your routine? And then you have a routine of breaking your routine. So it gets very meta.
I have a rule of 3 with my routines. I'm not allowed to go at least more than 3 days without going back to my foundational basics. Because I think any more than 3 days, I just go off in another direction altogether. I go down one rabbit hole or another. Sometimes it's good, sometimes not so much, right? From a mental health perspective, but also from a productivity perspective as well. Sometimes it can be really good. But what is it about routine that helped you manage stress in particular when you were there then? Or you said it's been a common theme throughout your life. What is it about routine? What does that give you?
That's a good question. I think ultimately change is stress, right? If we look at stress, if we try to get into the root cause of what is stress, and we tend to have a negative, we tend to hear the word stress and feel like it's a negative thing, which is, I'm sure we could talk for hours on this, how actually you need stress, don't you? You need stress to grow physically and mentally. And it's not that stress is a bad thing, it's that we need to create healthier relationships with stress. So I guess what routine does for me is it helps me do that. It helps me create a balance with how much stress I'm taking on, but make sure that that's not so much stress that I just feel completely overwhelmed and lost all the time. So I guess what the routine does is it enables me to go into those high stress environments, which I seem to keep putting myself into, because obviously part of us, we thrive in that, don't we? So if we're very driven, it can put us into a difficult place because we put ourselves into these stressful environments. And I think business owners are a really good example of this. We throw ourselves into these big goal-driven, massive change, stress-driven environments, and then we very quickly find ourselves feeling overwhelmed and flattened by the things that once excited us. And that's a horrible place to be, because it's like, well, I've got these big visions and these big goals, so I'm going to jump into a situation where I can pursue them, and then I feel overwhelmed, so I'm going to pull myself away from them, and then I feel depressed because I'm no longer moving towards them, and that's a horrible place to be. So I guess what works for me is putting myself into that stressful environment, and the military kind of forced this. So that's one of the things I've got to thank the military for. Put yourself into that stressful environment, but instead of just jumping back out of it once it starts to get overwhelming, it's right, what routine can I put in place to stop this stress that I need to grow and develop becoming a massive negative? And yeah, I guess that's what the routine does for me. It gives me that sanity, gives me that lifeboat in the storm of craziness.
As you're speaking there, I'm picturing this like pendulum swinging, obviously from one extreme to the other. And routine obviously is something that helps you find that center ground, which is awesome. Because I think that could be different for everyone. So even our listeners listening, if routine isn't the thing that anchors you in that center point, or at least brings you back to that center point, what could it be? That's really worth exploring for anybody listening, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting thing to consider. Is obviously we're all very different and we're all very similar. So, what keeps me sane might make somebody else insane. So we've got to understand that and have some comprehension of that. But then ultimately, something I think about, and I don't know the answer to this, is do we all have some form of routine, whether we recognize it as routine or not? Maybe we're a person that says, okay, I don't like routine, so I like to be out doing new things all the time. Well, then you could argue that your routine is you need to be doing different things for a certain amount of the time. Your routine is anti-routine, but I think getting clear on that can really help you. It's good for your self-awareness, but it's just good for you being in the driving seat of your life and recognizing what makes you feel good, what doesn't.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's heavily anchored into certainty, isn't it? And I think everybody needs that. It's one of our psychological fundamental needs that we all have. So if we
Yeah.
have certainty, like you said, that could be in chaos. But I think by applying that layer of routine, it becomes conscious. Like you said, you're then in the driver's seat. You're not being a victim to circumstance. You're actually showing up fully responsible and choosing what that's going to be, where you end up creating a life by design rather than chaos, essentially.
Yeah.
So how did you, I'm interested to dig into, because you mentioned that starting a business, especially the gym, that's when you kind of experience burnout quite a lot. You said that was more stressful than being in the military. Like, how, based on obviously that routine, that what you learned in the military to help you kind of handle the stressful situations and create that routine to reduce the intensity of that stress, going into that business and that burnout, what was different? Why was that so much more intense than the military for you when it comes to that stress?
Good, really good question. And I think it's important that people think about this. And something I've learned a lot about and really dug deep into since having my first business and since experiencing burnout is self-esteem. So I've developed a real deep interest in that. And something I knew when I had the business, the first one, I was working a lot. I was very stressed. I was overthinking a lot of situations. I was being a perfectionist. I wanted everything to be to the highest of standards. And I was hypersensitive to anything that was going wrong. And that makes sense when it's your business. It's you see it as a reflection of you. So if something's going wrong, you're like, oh, I've got to fix that. But obviously that can get chronic. So I was very aware that I was the problem. I knew that at the time. I knew the business was good. I knew the clients were pretty happy. I knew we had a great team, but I was still stressed. And I knew the issue is me. I know it's not external things. I know there's something going on with me. And I also used to catastrophize. Everything was the end of the world, and every decision was overthought because it might not work. Instead of that, it might work. So you're constantly stuck in your own mind. So what I started to learn retrospectively after was about self-esteem, and self-esteem also known as confidence. And if you think about it, in the military or in a say we used to work in the mines, so I bet we go back 100 years and people were working in coal mines in conditions that would kill most of us within 3 days today. That's cruel. I don't know if you've read The Road to Wigan Pier. If you want to feel better about your working conditions, read the Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell. And people are living on tripe. They're queuing to go to the toilet at 3 a.m. in the ice because they've got one toilet shared between 17 houses. And they worked in the mines. And there's something he talks about in the book about people that worked in the mines. Something that you don't know about is they had to crawl to get to the mine. So when you get to your mine, you had to crawl to your mine. Going on a massive tangent here, but it's all related. But they didn't get paid for that. So some people had to crawl 3 miles to get to the mine to start grafting, and they didn't get paid for that. And that's something that wasn't talked about. So the conditions that people used to work in were way more physically challenging than what we work in today, and mentally. And in the army, it was way more physically challenging, and to an extent mentally, because of obviously you've got the constant fears of what could happen. But what it doesn't bring up is your levels of self-esteem, especially from a management and leadership perspective. So if I'm going out and I'm working crazy hours, and I'm, and I've got certain risks around me, that creates a level of stress. But if I'm going and I'm like, I've got to apply a price to my value, which I have to do in a business, and I've got to keep people happy. And if I'm not keeping them happy, that's a reflection of me. And if things are going wrong, that's a reflection of me. And if my business isn't successful, I'm crap. I'm doing a terrible job. All of that stuff only happens in leadership roles, or if you own a business. It's this really unique thing where you place all of your self-worth in how the business is performing, and you're very sensitive to what's being said, and it's just this complete unique environment. And until that point, I'd never experienced that before. So I probably had always had these lower levels of self-esteem, but in a job, they didn't matter. They could hide away. As long as I did a good job, it didn't really matter. I still got paid at the end of the month. I wasn't going to get fired. There was no major issues. I didn't have to deal with major conflicts. Obviously the army is a major conflict, but day to day with people. So it's all of these self-esteem issues, I think, really get brought out when you are trying to go into a senior leadership role, or especially if you're trying to start your own business, or you're in your own business. It's going to raise some serious self-esteem issues that you might have hiding away. And the truth is, I think most of us have got self-esteem issues, unless we had an incredible childhood with amazing mentors as parents, which most of us didn't. Some of us were lucky enough to have that, but most of us didn't. So we've got these self-esteem issues that have been hidden away, and probably compounded by the schooling system, because the schooling system is not there to develop your self-esteem. It's there to make you a non-questioning worker, really. So yeah, the business for me brought those things out that the army didn't.
That's so interesting. So one of the methodologies we use when we are coaching is we have something called the stress awareness pyramid. So actually, if you imagine the bottom layer of the pyramid is what we call the root level, then the centerpiece is health, like lifestyle health, and then the top there is then the life areas that we will experience. And more often than not, people tend to recognize stress within an area of their life. So work triggers something, or a relationship triggers something. And actually, when you really start to dig in, it's not because they need to eat better or to breathe better. Yes, those things help and are necessary, and that those obviously what we cover then in that kind of health level, but it's the root level that needs the most attention, which is where we are looking at self-esteem. We're looking at our basic human needs. We're looking at unresolved emotions and unresolved past experiences and belief systems. And I think that's where the real power comes from. And I'm really curious to know if, first, how was burnout for you? Because that was obviously off the back of that business that you just described in that experience. But then also, how did you almost like claw your way out of burnout? Was there that root level stuff going on, or was it something else?
So first of all, I 100% agree with what you've just said. And I think there's a danger in the modern world that when it comes to the chronic levels of stress that we're experiencing, that we promote the wrong solution. So we say, I'm a great example. I owned a gym. I owned a CrossFit gym, and I was a CrossFit competitor. I was in peak physical condition, and I was stressed and burnt out. So to come and tell me I need to eat more vegetables and exercise more is you're like, no, you're missing the point. And obviously people do need to live healthier lives, and it does have a positive impact on how you feel about yourself, and it does reduce stress. But if you've got deeper level issues, which most of us have, it's not going to get rid of them. And we need to make sure that we're not just glancing over those things with these, eat more, meditate, and go for a run. You're like, okay, yes, those things are good, but there's a deeper layer of a problem that we need to solve. And the truth is, for most people, is that if they solve those deeper level problems, they're going to have more energy to look after themselves and more self-love to want to do that stuff anyway. So I think we look at it in the wrong way. So 100% agree with you on that. How was burnout for me? It was a slow burn. So I owned the business for 5 years. The first 2 were fantastic because they were all fantastic because it was growing all the time, because it was a good business. Probably about the 3rd year in, I started to realize that I was getting quite stressed. I took on more responsibilities. I had more bills to pay. I took on my own unit. Just started to get a little bit more stressed about that stuff. And this probably ultimately comes down to fears around money I had from my childhood. We grew up with not a lot. My parents were always worried about money. So I think that's been passed on to me a little bit. So yeah, about 3 years in, I started to not enjoy it as much. I started to feel the weight of responsibility. 4 years in, I started to lose my mojo, which was horrible, because when I started it, I was super driven, super passionate, all big picture. Yes, it's going to be successful. Nothing can stop me. Year 4, I'm kind of like, oh, I'm feeling a bit tired by all of this. And then the 5th year, so the 6 months leading into the pandemic, I was just tired, fed up. I was working 6-7 days a week. I wasn't enjoying it. I was grumpy. I wasn't spending time with my partner. I was still looking after myself, but I was doing the bare minimum that I had to do to kind of not go into really poor health. And I just wasn't enjoying it. I wasn't excited anymore. I couldn't see a future. I didn't like myself because I wasn't myself. So it's this vicious cycle. And it's probably when COVID kicked in, I realized that I'm sure if I'd gone to the doctors, I'd have been diagnosed as depressed. But that's when I recognized that I'm just not in a good place. And I think the fact that I'm a stubborn hard worker didn't actually help, because I worked too much for too long, probably more than what most people would. It was 4 years in the end of, well, in 5 years, Laura and I, my partner and I, went on holiday twice, and I probably had maybe 6 weekends over that whole of the 5 years where I didn't work. And I was also working split shifts. So I was opening the gym every morning and then closing it every evening. I mean, maybe in the last year less because I had a bit of a bigger team, but I was still mentally there. So yeah, I got depressed. I got very tired. I got very fed up. And the worst thing about it for me was I lost my passion for life. I lost my passion for wanting to achieve bigger things. And that put me in a horrible place that I talked about earlier, where I know that's who I am. I know that's what fires me up. I love hearing people's ideas and visions. I love motivating them around theirs. I love getting motivated around mine. And the fact that I'd lost that and I just couldn't be bothered made me feel miserable, because I'm like, that's not who I am. What have I done? Why have I done this to myself? And obviously it affected the business as well, because the business was great. We were looked at as one of the best gyms in the area, in the region. When I closed it, people were absolutely flabbergasted. I had other gyms contacting me saying, we used to do what you would do. We used to copy you because you were doing such a great job. Will you come over and help us do what you were doing? And I'm just like, I didn't see it as that. I'm just like, I just thought we're failing. We're not doing a good enough job. And so, yeah, so it put me into depression. Luckily, so for me, it's a bit of a strange one, but I think COVID came at the right time for me personally, because it gave me an opportunity to spend time on my own without really feeling too stressed about it. About 6 months in, I actually closed the business, but I'd already had 6 months of just being at home with Laura and Laura's children. It was amazing weather, so it was kind of like the universe had sent me some R&R. But really, the truth is, it probably took me over a year to feel motivated again, and probably closer to 18 months to feel, now really, like the last 6 months, I'd say I've felt really kind of back to my normal self. So it was a 12 to 18 month recovery process. I spent some time with psychologists when I was starting to feel better, because I didn't want it to happen again. So the first psychologist didn't know what to do with me, because she was like, well, you haven't got any major issues going on. I was like, I know, I'm trying to be preventative. She's like, oh. And then I found a psychologist who I actually work with now, part of Better Happy, called Ross McIntosh, who's an absolute legend. And he introduced me to something called ACT. And there's a book called The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. So I'd highly recommend people reading that. It should be in schools, in my opinion. And it's basically this, it kind of, for me, complements Buddhism. So I'd spent a lot of time studying Buddhism. Buddhism's about mindfulness, and I'm very massive oversimplification, but it's about making peace with life as it is, and being mindful, being thankful for the present moment. Whereas ACT adds on a very practical element to that, which helps you navigate your goals and the busy modern world. And it gives you this really kind of practical framework to follow. It has mindfulness in it as well. It's got CBT in it, mindfulness. But it gives you this really practical framework to follow if you're very goal driven or career driven. So that was a kind of another tipping point for me. I think finding Buddhism when I was in my mid-20s was a massive paradigm shift. Going through burnout made me realize I hadn't got it as figured out as I thought I had. And then finding ACT made me feel all confident again. Hopefully in 5 years' time, I haven't had another drama, and I'm still saying the same thing, but I might be that there's another thing I need to learn. I'm sure there is.
I'm sure there is, right? Because we all have to just keep on learning, right? Got to keep on rolling with it. Thank you so much for sharing that, because it's not easy to sometimes speak about some of the real darker moments. And it's funny, when you were speaking there about burnout, it's like I can relate to that feeling so deeply, and it's something that it came in the same kind of way as you. It's like just working hard. I was doing well. I was doing really well, actually, work-wise. And it was like a shock to other people to realize I was at that extent. It was very much a lot of that root level stuff, on top of the exhaustion, on top of the lack of mental self-care. Like you, it was more about the physical side rather than looking after those emotions and mental well-being. And it was at that point where I was just on the floor. The past had almost caught up with me. The present was just top.
Why do you think it was? What do you think was some of the root things that were making you do that?
What do you mean when you say do that?
So you were working too much, is that right? Or
Yeah, and I truly believe that was like a coping mechanism for the past catching up. And I think sometimes these coping mechanisms can hide in plain sight. And as high performers and people that are driven, we see that as a good thing, but actually sometimes it can be a very deep distraction. And I think sometimes, unless we become very conscious, because we get to the emotional extent that we have to, or something significant happens in our lives, we then actually wake up to that and we can actually start to assess what's going on. Otherwise, you just keep on going down the track. And we work with people now that are so far down that track and had no idea that that was what they was experiencing. Something else that's quite interesting based on what you said there as well is like, you know, this happened over a period of time. I think I'm pretty same for me as well. And we actually, our nervous system gets stuck in these hyper anxious states or
we get
drop downs, right?
We get comfortable being uncomfortable, don't we?
Which is great to some extent. However, if our nervous system isn't getting that time in what's called like that window of tolerance, then we're going to struggle massively to be able to rest and recover whilst we're in those massive acceleration periods. That's why I'm so much more aware of pace. You mentioned cadence earlier. Can you elaborate a bit more on that? Because I think it could be super relevant now.
Yeah, I think ultimately everybody's got a cadence that they can work at that and achieve at that's good for them, where they're kind of optimal. And maybe historically, when we were hunter-gatherers, we weren't super strict with it, but I think we had a lot of protections when we were hunter-gatherers from the issues that we have today. You know, there was a lot of built-in natural protection measures in life for most of human history until now, wasn't there? You know, we only had whole natural foods. We had to talk to people because we worked in communities. We had to do things that we were good at because survival was the name of the game. We had to move to survive. We had to sleep when the sun went down and wake up when the sun came up. So I think there was a lot of protection, natural protections from life, that meant maybe we didn't have to think about our cadence. Whereas today, we don't have those natural protection measures. So we definitely have to have these higher levels of self-awareness. And I think one part of that is kind of figuring out what your cadence is, and everybody's different. And you can have cadence in different things. So you can have your work cadence, you can have your health cadence. Laura and I, we have, and we promote this as part of Better Happy, we have a cadence calendar where we get you to think about what's the two things you need to do on a daily basis to kind of keep you feeling pretty good. Instead of trying to plan your perfect day, why don't you think about those? Because the chances are, if you're work driven like we are, and you want to make a difference, you're going to overwork. Like, you're going to, and even though you know emotionally that logically that you shouldn't, emotionally you're still going to do it. So instead of trying to plan your perfect day, have the things in that you need to do to kind of keep you feeling tip top. And once you've done two things and you focus on them for, you know, anywhere between 3 to 6 months, they become habit, and then you can focus on something else. I'm very good at knowing my kind of health cadence. So I know that I need to eat 3 meals a day. That's a cadence for me. I know that when I let the breakfast slip, because I'm like, well, you know, it doesn't matter, I'm trimming down a bit and I've got a busy day, but I know that has a knock-on effect later on, because I'm hungry at lunch, and then I'm hungrier for dinner, and then I overeat, and then I don't sleep properly, and then because I don't sleep properly, I'm not as energized the next day. So it's this knock-on. So I think you've got a cadence with stuff like that. You can have a cadence with your partner. So, you know, okay, how much time, and this is what we do, it's probably, some people might cringe because we're so logical, but my partner and I, how much time do we need to spend together for us to not start feeling like we're neglecting each other? And we know that for us, it's one date night a week, because we both will overwork, because we like what we do. So we have one night a week. It's tonight, actually. How exciting, Thursday. So one night a week where we don't work, and we go out for a date, and it's normally to the local pub, and we normally go and eat the same food, but it's just a ritual now. And that keeps us, you know, some people don't do that. And then before you know it, you've had 3 months and you haven't spent a night together, and you don't understand why you feel like you're not in a relationship, because it's figuring it out for that. But then also for work, you know, what's my cadence for work? And I'm still figuring mine out, to be honest. I'm always kind of working on it. But, you know, when I work from home, I know that I know it's between 6 and 7 hours I can really graft. And if I try and do more than that, I start to drop off. I'm kind of like, what's the point in doing this? I'm figuring out at the moment how long I can work in sprints. So get really aggressively focused on a thing and get that done. I think for me, it's about 8 weeks. I know some people it's 12 weeks, but I know once I figure that out and be more specific with it, I know I can figure out then that maybe about every 8 weeks, I need to go and have a long weekend. I've just worked intensely for the first quarter of this year, and then had a skiing trip, and I think it was just at the right time. So that's just under 3 months, January, February, March, just over 3 months, January, February, no, just under 3 months. So I probably didn't realize I needed that holiday, but it was booked in, and I felt really refreshed and a bit tired after it, actually. So maybe it's around that. But yeah, I think it's really important to think about what your cadence is, because what most of us do is we think we're 9 till 5 Monday to Friday, because that's what society's taught us. So we just like buy into that.
When I left my job, where it wasn't even a 9 till 5 job.
It was like it was like more like a 9 till 10 in the evening job.
Yeah, if not earlier. But then when it comes to entrepreneurship, like John will vouch for this. Oh my God, I was like, oh, I should be at work. Like, why am I not working? Why am I not doing this? Why am I not doing that? And it took me what, two years, I think, probably.
Yeah, to realize that you didn't have to start working.
Do whatever I want.
Yeah, exactly.
You're taking on all the stress of owning your own business and not having paid holidays and all that stuff. So you no longer have to work 9 till 5. Work when you feel good and hold yourself accountable to your goals. But yeah, you go and walk your dogs. Like, that's one of the best things for me is I try to remind myself now, because I still do it. I still put pressure on myself to be doing better, and and you're always comparing yourself to someone, which is stupid, because there's always someone doing better. So, I try to remind myself on a daily and weekly basis. Like, it's amazing now that when I'm not delivering, I can just go and walk dogs whenever I want to go and walk dogs without having to tell anybody that I'm going. I don't think I could ever have a job again, actually, which is a problem. I need to make sure that the business, that's another reason that I need to make sure what businesses work for me.
I think it's just important. It's important to become aware of when you need to put your foot on the gas and when you need to step back. But like you mentioned there, we can get so carried away with what we're doing that we forget to take our foot off the gas. And then it could be 8 weeks, it could be 12 weeks, it could be more before we realize that, oh crap, okay, I've gone way too far beyond this. I've literally, my reserves, my gas tank is empty. And then it takes longer to get to that recovery point where you're able to function at a higher level again. And that's when that level of awareness comes in, of being able to know that, okay, like you say, is you find your cadence. If you say it might be 8 weeks, okay, at that 8 week mark, I need to now take a step back. I need to replenish. I need to recover. I need to slow down a bit. But at the same time, I need to know when to put my foot back on the gas again. Otherwise, you can either go too far on each direction. You can become too complacent.
Like we just do.
Yeah, exactly. Like we did in Thailand, we're living on the beach and thinking, are we taking this too easy? Yeah, when you start to question it, when you start to think, okay, maybe it's time to put our foot on the gas again. It's having that level of awareness where okay, when to go, when to stop, or when to slow down enough. So you finding that balance a little bit, so you're not going too far in either direction.
I completely agree. Yeah, go on, Charlotte.
Vishen Lakiani from Mind Valley founder, he talks about the idea of navigation and acceleration. And this is something that we then help our clients with now is how do they actually recognize that? How are they monitoring how they're actually feeling? And having that self-awareness that you mentioned earlier, Mike, is absolutely crucial, because you have to be checking in to see, okay, how am I doing energy-wise? How am I doing with my emotions? Am I getting as much harmony from my life, not necessarily balance, but harmony in the most important areas, and being aligned to your values? Because those are the first things that are like the signals that are saying, okay, something needs to shift. I'm curious to know how you're keeping an eye on that for yourself.
Well, interestingly, I think about the Better Happy logo. It's kind of like these two things that cross each other, and it's that analogy really. It's kind of like, if you think of the center point of that logo, that's your optimal routine, your baseline. You're sleeping right, your relationships are right, all of that stuff. And then, but if you want to achieve anything, as Josh was just saying, you're going to need to break it a bit. You're going to, if you want to build a new thing on your house, you're going to have to make some mess, aren't you? So you're going to have to get pulled away from that to achieve things. You have to work in sprints. You're going to have to get away from your routine. You're going to have, for me, one of the biggest breakthroughs I had in my life was living in Australia, reading that book from the Dalai Lama. That was as far away from my routine as I could be. So you've got to utilize that routine, but then you've also got to step away from it to achieve things, to grow your business. But then you've got to love yourself enough and like yourself enough to give yourself permission to get back to that center point. So it's a it's a fine art, and it's not surprising when you start to break it down that people struggle with it so much, because if you've got any lack of self-esteem, you might be really goal driven, but then you might not like yourself enough or believe that you're worthwhile enough to have a break because you're not doing a good enough job. So you've got to figure all that stuff out. And I think it all comes back to basic coaching principles, doesn't it? If you look at religion throughout history, it's all the kind of same message. You've got to have some kind of big vision or goal that inspires you, something that's more meaningful than you to move you towards. So that's got to be there. And then you've got to get your self-esteem right so that you can move towards that goal in a way that's sustainable and you're not killing yourself. You've got to find a routine that enables you to get there. You've got to have a strategy that you're willing to follow and work in sprints, but then again, love yourself enough to come back and have a break. So it's not easy. It's definitely not. It's much easier to just go and do a job that you don't really like, to pay for stuff that you don't really need and not have to worry about all that stuff. But then that makes you miserable as well, which is why so many people are unhappy. So it's kind of like, it's not easy, but it's very rewarding. How do I do it? The most effective thing for me is at Cadence kind of, this is going to look like an absolute drop, but it's in the office. We normally have it on our fridge, but Laura's brought it up the other day because she's telling me off that we haven't done it, and it's actually not looking very good. But that's the Cadence calendars that we promote. You can download this at Better Happy for free, by the way. So that's my plug. We'll put the link. But basically, what that does, I found that's what works best for me. So I'm a bit scatterbrained. You should probably tell by the way I'm talking. And what I've played around with is trying to build the perfect routine and planning the week and tracking everything and making sure that I'm doing certain tasks at certain, when can I train and all of that stuff. But actually I found that because you're trying to achieve things, you're going to have curveballs get thrown at you all the time, and you're going to learn something that really excites you, and then you're going to want to go, right, we want to go and implement that now, but we're supposed to be training. Well, yeah, but this thing's in my head now, and if I'm too rigid with that routine, we can't implement this new thing that's really exciting me, or I can't go and see that person, or blah blah blah. So I found that just trying to have this super stringent productivity routine actually didn't work for me to achieve my goals. I still have an element of it, and it builds from that. So now how I think about it is I have, what's my 2 daily non-negotiables that I want to focus on? And if I know that those 2 daily non-negotiables are being tracked, I feel pretty good on a daily basis. I do the same on a weekly. What's the 2 things I need to do on a weekly basis? And then quarterly. So this has got a monthly something different. So me and Laura, we know that we neglect our relationship for work and other things, and looking after our dogs and all that stuff, and running the kids around. So we kind of hold ourselves accountable, and we have a monthly something different on our chart. So every month we're like, have we done something different that we've enjoyed together? So weekly we have our date night. Monthly we have something different that we do together. So in January we went axe throwing. in February we had a weekend in London. So we literally just we get somebody to look after dogs. We go and work in London for the weekend, and we get there on the Thursday or the Friday. We go and go to a gym when we're there, and we still work, but we'll go and do random stuff. I think we went on a riverboat cruise down the Thames and had some jazz music playing whilst we were eating our dinner. I'm getting told off because there's nothing in there for March because I went snowboarding. That was a me thing. But it's good because then it holds us accountable, and we're like, well, we haven't done anything, and she's telling me off now. So that kind of, if you think about what you were just talking about, relationships, energy, goals, health, all of that stuff, that's actually, I'm using that to kind of keep myself accountable to those things, and that's what works for me.
I love that. You're not so rigid, are you? Even though you're Mr. Routine, you don't really have anything that's that.
I've become a bit more flexible since meeting Charlotte.
And I think I've got more routines.
Yeah,
It's so strange.
Compromise.
We started to kind of flip a little bit. I started to bring the craziness of the extremes into a bit more, but acceptable balance.
Find a way that works, haven't we? I think as a couple, but even as an individual. So I've got a bit like you, Mike. I've got kind of my own like method, if you like, for what keeps me grounded. That includes having 10 sacred rituals that I strive towards every day. I give myself permission to not achieve them every day. That is a necessary step for anybody that's listening. You have to give yourself permission. It's okay not to achieve them all sometimes. And then that feeds into a larger stretch goal for whatever it is I'm working on, whether that be in entrepreneurship, whether that be with my health or relationship. It can be anything. And that kind of creates a bit of a through line for me to know and to be able to monitor my cadence as to, okay, do I need to accelerate or do I need to navigate right now? And there's one thing I must mention for any women that are listening that is really, really, really important for finding your cadence, is to be aware of your infradian rhythm, your 28-day cycle, where you can't expect yourself to be, there you go, perfect. Yep.
It's not mine, it's Laura's, but I know that's kind of what it's like. Sorry, carry on, Charlotte. That's good thought. And I've interrupted.
For anybody seeing this on video, Mike should on audio, Mike's just shown us the In the Flow book by Elisa Vitti, which is really good for breaking down your infradian rhythm so that you can then adapt to your nature when it comes to expectations of yourself. And this is within fitness, this is within productivity, so many other areas. You can actually adapt and actually start to look at what it is you need as an individual, because for a very long time there's been a very big expectation that women are supposed to essentially follow the same rhythm as men, right? And when I changed my lifestyle, it's probably been for what, the last 2 to 3 years, something like that now, strictly in my calendar with certain things that I book in based on where I am in my phases, based on the nutrition and the foods that I'm eating, it just takes you to a whole nother level of performance if you really start to attune to your natural rhythm. So it would be a disservice if I didn't mention that to my fellow ladies out there.
That's really interesting as well, because I don't know what the science is around this, or if there's any science, but I'm convinced that men aren't hugely dissimilar. Because I noticed this just on a kind of intuitive basis, that I heard somebody, I can't remember who it was. It was a female. She was talking the other day. She's a high level athlete, and she was saying that she was talking to her coach and she didn't feel very good, essentially. And the coach said, "Well, that's fine. You're pursuing a high performance life and a high level goal." And he talked to her about the rule of thirds, and I really resonated with this. And he said, if you're pursuing something challenging or big, then you should feel great about a third of the time, okay about a third of the time, and like crap for another third of the time. And if that's how you feel, it means you're probably doing something right. And I really resonated with that. And I noticed, because I walk my dogs with mates and I go for a run with another mate on Saturdays, and I tend to notice that people, blokes as well, tend to kind of feel up and down. And you tend to notice that when one person's feeling down, it's quite common across a group. So I don't know if it's something to do with the moon, or I don't know, but yeah, basically I think it's good for everyone to think about that as well. Just that it's okay to feel like crap sometimes, and it doesn't mean that you're failing. It doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It doesn't mean that you've not been optimal in your routine. It just means you're a human being, and perhaps you're just not feeling 100%. Because I used to think I had to fix that. I used to think when something's going wrong, right, I've not done something right here, I've not slept enough, or I need to meditate more, or I've eaten the wrong foods. And that's where the happiness trap book really helped me, because it's kind of like, just make peace with the fact that you're a human being and you're not going to feel happy all the time. Okay.
I went through the same shift. It was that whole like doing more, and actually that's probably one of my biggest pet peeves still now with the personal development industry, is like, it is trying to treat people as if they're broken rather than just raising self-awareness and self-knowledge and self-compassion. And I think those are like fundamentals that are needed. I remember giving myself such a hard time for not being able to keep up. So obviously I was in the fitness industry for a long time, and it's very male dominant, where it was then. And to try and keep up to the same level and the same rhythms as the guys was, I would think it's something wrong with me. Why can't I do that? And that then, like I said earlier, it feeds into poor self-esteem, and that then leads into poor
vicious cycle. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. Very, very relevant.
Definitely, it's why a lot of women in this industry don't tend to last long in male-dominated high-performance roles, is because they're expected to force themselves to work to that same level, which is stupid, because their skill sets change from week to week in terms of energetically, production wise, creativity wise, and I believe men also do the same, even though we don't have the 28-day cycle as women do, but we get influenced by that energy as well.
Yeah, of course.
I noticed when Charlotte's going through the different phases, I can be influenced by that same energy when it comes to creativity, or come to more that lower, take a step back and rest type energy. I notice it on my own training, on my own kind of day to day as well. So it's regardless whether you're female or male, the more time you spend around people, you're gonna be influenced by each other's energies as well. So it's gonna affect you.
Yeah.
I think
I think one of the hardest thing, one of the most important things in life, and one of the hardest things in life is accepting that we're all different, because we don't, and we say we do on a logical level, but we get frustrated when people aren't being like we are, or thinking the way we are, in the mood that we're in. And I'm just as guilty of this as anybody else. And it's such an important thing to learn, and such a fine art to make, to really, when you're communicating with people, try and think about the fact that they're different. They see things differently to you. They might be feeling differently to you, and they're not the same as you. And I think the better you are at doing that, the more you can achieve, and the better businesses and places and communities will be. But it's not easy. It's something we all have to work on.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if there is an end destination where everything is just perfect and seamless. That exists. Yeah. One thing that you said there earlier, Mike, as well, is about like you was constantly like trying to do more. You need to meditate more. You need to refine your sleep a little bit more. It's that sense of doing that got me as well. I got stuck into that cycle. Okay, well, I need to do something different. And then when I did turn that tables of, okay, well, no, who are you being whilst you're even trying to do these things? That just then shone a massive spotlight onto our sense of being, right? And who are you being in that process? How present are you being to be able to have that level of empathy, like you just described, and be able to meet somebody where they are? Because if you're constantly just trying to do something to tick something off your list, you've got your blinkers on. You're not paying attention. You're not where you need to be.
And I think for people that are very driven, you really need to dig into the why. Why are you doing that? That's so important. And this has been a big win for me, is why are you constantly feeling like you need to do more? Why do you feel like you need to do more in the business? Why do you feel like you need to do more on yourself? You know, why is that? And when you dig into it, for me personally, it's because ultimately I had this message that I'm not good enough as I am. And I will be happy and fulfilled once I get to that level, or once I get to that thing. And that's a really bad mentality to have. That's going to lead to you burning out. And maybe mine was diluted by my military experience, because in the military you learn that things need to be done perfectly, because it can mean the difference between life and death. So in that situation, it's got a kind of benefit. But if you go through life with that mentality that things have got to be perfect and you're not good enough, you just constantly, you're never happy as the way things are. So you're constantly trying to change and do things, and telling yourself that you're going to be happy when you get to A, B, C. But as we know, the truth is, no goal is going to make you feel truly happy. It's going to give you a short-term boost. Yeah. But it's kind of getting to I don't know the right wording for it, but I've kind of got to this philosophy with this since I went into this business, because I still have to remind myself not to do it, that it's along the lines of you've got to have these big, audacious goals that inspire and excite you, but then you've also got to not give a damn if you achieve them or not. I know that sounds really odd, but it's kind of like, look, it's what's going to make you happy is being the person you need to be to move you towards those goals. But you might not achieve them because there's so many factors that you can't control. You might be the best business person in the world and start a business in the best market, and then something can happen and it's a failure. And if you're putting your self-esteem in whether or not you achieve that goal, you're putting your life happiness in powers completely outside of your ether. So it doesn't make any sense. And in that book, the book I read called The 7 Pillars of Self-Esteem, which is not an easy read, but very interesting. The guy he's passed away now, but he was like one of the experts on self-esteem. And he's talking to a group of senior execs of Chrysler in the USA many years ago. And basically Chrysler was about to go into administration, through nobody in particular's fault. And there was conversations going on with the government with, well, are the government going to bail you out? So he goes into this room and he asked this group of senior execs, 80K plus a year, but well-paid jobs, probably more than that. And he said, how many of you are worried about losing your jobs? Obviously, they all put their hands up. And he said, how many of you would feel unhappy about yourselves if you lost your jobs because you're going to be unemployed and you're not got a source of income? And they all put their hands up. And he said, what you're doing is you're putting your self-esteem and how you value your life into the hands of a group of people sat in the government office that you've never met before. Because if they choose to bail this company out, you're going to continue to feel good about yourselves. Whereas if they decide they're not going to bail you out, you're then going to change how you feel about yourself to being low. And he's like, do you feel happy about placing the level of self-respect you have for yourself into the group of some people in the government office that you've never met before? And obviously the room said no, but we all do that. We place how we judge the value of our lives and how successful we're being, especially if we go into business. And it's such a terrible mindset to go through business with, because it's going to make you miserable unless you're lucky and things do go the way that you planned. And obviously working hard will help for that, but the chances are it might not work. So you've got to not put your self-esteem in the results you're getting, but in the effort that you're putting in to achieve them. I think that's a really important lesson a lot of people need to learn, and I wish I'd learned earlier as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think we got to that point, didn't we? We've been kind of learning this, I think, probably since the pandemic, to be honest, because all of our plans kind of went a bit skew-with, and it made us call into question, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Even last year when we was in Thailand, we always had this conversation of, okay, well, what if we actually did just stop with wellness theory? What if we just stopped today and just said, no, that's it? How would that affect our lives? How would it affect us as individuals? And it was really interesting because like we both was okay with that idea, which shocked me. Totally shocked me. John's having because he's live on a beach with the dogs.
Yeah,
and
sounds good to me. But what a life! Like daily beach walks with dogs.
It was just it, but it was really surprising, and I felt like that was quite a nice milestone in our journey from personal development, but also as entrepreneurs. So before we had wellness theory, our coaching brand was called Cultivate and Life Spark, and we had a fitness education business as well. And I think we were very attached to those personally. And like when we exited those businesses, it was almost like giving away a baby to what I can imagine. I've never done that for anyone listening. But it just felt like that. Now, with wellness theory,
She charged for them. Sorry.
That's it. It's got a different thought. We've learned another way. No, but with wellness theory, we are deeply connected to it. We are so passionate about it, but we're here now out of choice because we really want to help people realize when they're healthy and well, they can be a force for good in the world. Like we see this, it brings us alive. Otherwise, we could have just stayed living on the beach. Playing the same level we were playing at, but it just didn't make any sense. But we're also okay with if it did end tomorrow, that's okay. We need to find something to do with ourselves, but you know.
I call exactly what you've just explained the passion problem, and I think so many people get stuck in that. And that's we've got the option of comfort now. Like you guys just said, you probably could. I'm sure you've got enough. You know, I'm sure you're both sensible enough to have enough around you that you could probably go and live for a few years, maybe the rest of your life, on a beach in Thailand. And the truth is, I don't want to make it out like I'm, you know, a multimillionaire, because I'm certainly not, but Laura and I could sell our house and there's probably enough equity in our house for us to go and live for quite a few years comfortably on a beach somewhere where life's a bit cheaper than it is here. Probably lasts about 2 weeks in the UK. But if you do that, the chances are, well, I'm sure you'll enjoy it. But if you've got these strong values and these visions, they're going to be there. They're not going to disappear. You know, so you two clearly want to make a difference in this area, because even though you've changed the businesses, you're on the same kind of coaching, development, helping people. So you've got these values, and I think what makes you happy in life is being aligned to your values. I think when you live aligned to your values, you feel like a fulfilled person, and that's never going to go away. So even if you do burn yourself out, which we don't want to happen, and you're like, right, I've had enough, I have to go and have some time off. Maybe a year down the line, 2 years down the line, those values are going to start talking to you again, going, I want to go and do that thing. But then you're going to be stuck, because then you're like, last time I did it, I got burnt out, and then it led to me not being in a very good place. So people get stuck. They're like, oh, I really want to do this stuff, but actually when I tried to do it, I burnt myself out. So actually I'm just going to not do it. I'm either going to do nothing or do a job that just is not aligned to me whatsoever, because it feels safer. And then you're in this place where you're not burnt out, which is great, but you're also not very fulfilled, which is bad. And I think a lot of people end up there because they try business, or they try a big goal. It doesn't always have to be business. It's just a goal. And it didn't go the way they planned. So the magic lies in what you were just talking about, which is being clear on what your values are and getting really excited about pursuing goals that are created by your values. but not placing your self-worth in what you achieve whilst trying to do that. That's when the issues start. And we've all done it. I'm sure you guys did in your first business. You know, right, we want to make these things happen. We're driven by our values. We're driven by our passion. You start doing it, and then all of a sudden, the monkey on your shoulder saying you're doing a crap job. Everybody else is doing better than you. You're going to have to keep working. You're not growing fast enough. You're making all these mistakes. What are you playing at? You don't know what you're doing. Why are you even trying this? So you're living with this monkey telling you that you're useless and that you're doing a crap job, and it's miserable. So that you end up burning yourself out because you work too much because you're listening to the monkey, and then you like hate your goals, and then you're just in this horrible place. So to get to a better place, you can't just get rid of them. Maybe you can if you need to reload and recharge and give yourself some R&R, but if you just get rid of them, you end up being unfulfilled. So it's finding that way to pursue them, but not beating yourself up about where you are on the journey or how successful you've been. It's what Aerosmith said, isn't it? Life's a journey, not a destination. And it's that simple message that we need to drill into ourselves. And I still do it now. You know, I still put pressure on myself. Now we share a networking group, and there's business owners and entrepreneurs in that group are outstanding. They're incredible. When you look at them, and many of them are younger than me, and I'm like, wow, how did you get to that point? And then sometimes there's a little that monkey starts to come back going, they're younger than you. Why haven't you done all that? Why are you so far behind? Why aren't you working harder? Why aren't you grafting more? And I just have to remind myself that monkey's going to rob any joy out of the journey, and the journey's right now. So that's where you've got to get to. And if you're beating yourself up about what you've achieved and what you haven't achieved and where you need to be, you're never going to enjoy it. So you've got to address that thing.
It's interesting as well, isn't it? Because it's easy for us to look from the outside at other people, other entrepreneurs or other people's lives and have that little monkey talking. But at the same time, if you trade places with that person, you chances are that maybe they're not as happy as what they could be, or maybe they are, but actually it's not what you would interpret as happy as well. Like, we all have to go through our own journeys. I think the sooner we can become conscious about journeys, the better, so that we can actually start to influence them, all the better. I wish that there was things like podcasts when I was younger, honestly.
We actually live in an amazing time, don't we? I know there's lots of problems with the way with life at the moment, but actually it's never been better for humans if we're willing to make an effort. You know, we've got so much opportunity available to us. You guys live where you live now, and you've made that reality. When I was, I had the opportunity to join the army. I lived in Australia. I taught kids on a summer camp in America. You know, it was only 70 years ago. People were hiding in the underground stations in London because we were in a world war. So it's a pretty good time to be alive, especially for those of us fortunate enough to be born into a wealthy society. But we have got to figure out how to navigate life.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny. I always see kind of millennials, really, but I think that probably expands out a little bit, is almost like the lost generation. We're sort of this in between of the old ways and the new ways. Like, the younger people are just getting it, right? Because that's how they're entering into this world. We've kind of seen both sides of the coin, and I feel like when we work with clients, that it tends to be that lost generation. It tends to be those people that are trying to connect those dots and figure this stuff out. And it's so interesting is when those dots do connect, is their happiness increases drastically.
Such an interesting way of thinking. I've never thought about that. The lost generation.
Yeah, well, that's how I felt, to be honest.
Yeah, same. I think a lot of people in our position feel like that, because depends who you're obviously around and kind of what you've been brought up to believe. You're kind of being pulled back to the old ways, but being forced to adopt the new ways as well. And it's one of those things, like you said, it's about not really taking too much precedence in either, but just saying, okay, what works for you? What resources are there right now to be able to live the life that we want and to do what we want? And like you said, like we live in an age now where you have no limitations, really. Your limitations are based on how you think. There's unlimited resources to achieve what you want. And well, we do that through Wellness Theory. You obviously do that through Better Happy, helping people as well. So one thing I would like to, we mentioned a few times in this conversation about Better Happy, and I really want to touch into that now, is how you help people. And what is Better Happy, and why do you do what you do now with Better Happy? Why is it such a passion for you?
So the biggest paradigm shift I had in my life was when I was walking through a train station in Perth, Australia, and it was beautiful sunny day. It's quite beautiful here today, actually. So beautiful sunny day. I just got out of the military. I had money in the bank. I'd got a job on a rooftop bar, as stress-free as it could be. And I remember thinking to myself, life can't get much better than this, really. I've got no stress. I live in a beautiful part of the world. It's sunny. I've got an easy job. I've still got money in the bank from my time in the military. I came out of the military unscathed. What more could, how lucky am I? I remember thinking that to myself. And I also remember thinking to myself, but I don't feel fulfilled. I feel like something's missing. And the internal dialogue I had was, is there something wrong with me? Because life couldn't be any better. And I still feel like there's something missing. And I wasn't depressed. I was just kind of a bit empty, I suppose is the right word. And then I was walking past a bookshop, and it was one of those glass front bookshops. And they had, do you know, when they're promoting a book, so they have the same book over and over again. And it was The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama. And it had his face on the front. So I just had this old Tibetan monk smiling at me with his glasses on about 50 times in this bookstore window. And the book was called The Art of Happiness. And I thought that seems apt for the internal dialogue that I'm having right now. So I picked up the book. I paid for the book. I didn't steal it. That would be funny. Bought the book, and I basically, as soon as I picked it up and started reading it, I was hooked on it. And I remember thinking, why don't they teach this in schools? So I consumed it in 2 days. I couldn't put it down. And there's lots of great stuff in that book. It's written with a psychologist. I think the guy's name's Harold Cutler. And one of the things that I took from that book is that the meaning of life is to be happy, and that happiness isn't just feeling joyful and smiley all the time, but it's more of a sense of fulfillment that we get from being good people, from helping others, and from trying to make a difference in the world through our own strengths. So that's a big thing that I took from that book, and it was explained in a way that wasn't woo-woo, but that was very logical and specific. And I'm a very logical thinker, so I was completely bought onto it. Even things like, if you hold on to negative emotions because somebody else has done something bad to you, that's only going to make you feel bad, not them. So lots of logic around how the brain works and how ultimately we feel happy by helping others and letting go of all the negative stuff that we hold on to. So I couldn't understand why I'd never been taught that. And then my mission in life became, well, I want to help the world be a happier place, because that's me helping others. It's going to make me happier from a selfish perspective. And I know that if I'd had this education when I was younger, I could have been a more contributing member to society much earlier. So that was the big shift that happened. And then I came back to the UK after a couple of years later from that, after living on monasteries and studying. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to go into business. So I started the gym to help people be healthier and happier. And that was an incredible experience, but with its negatives, as we discussed. But I knew I wanted to make a wider impact. And basically from my studies of society in the UK and seeing what was going wrong and understanding what I'd learned from the Dalai Lama and Buddhism and Taoism and other philosophies, I very quickly came to the conclusion that if you want to fix the happiness problem, which we have, which also links to the health problems and everything else, but generally we're quite a depressed nation and world, actually, the best place to do that is the workplace. And the reason for this is, what humans need to be healthy and to be happy is they need, and if you read books like Healthy at 100 and Blue Zone Solutions, you start to get an insight into what the commonalities across the world's longest lived cultures. And I know some people will debate whether those books are accurate, but I don't think you can ignore what's in there. So what do people actually need? Well, they need to be in a community of positive, supportive people, which we used to get through our tribes and through our local communities, which we don't do as much anymore because of the digital age. They need to have a meaning and purpose bigger than themselves to work towards. Historically, humans used to get that through religion. Most humans used to get that through religion. Now, especially in the Western world, it's not as popular as it once was. They need an environment that's supportive of their health, and we tend to tell ourselves it's gyms and all this stuff, but actually what people need is a community, something bigger than themselves to work towards, teamwork and a community and an environment. So where's the place, if people aren't getting that from religion as much anymore, if people aren't as much connected to their local communities anymore, where's the place that a person can find that? And it's the workplace. And data's shown us that. The data's shown us that the modern employee is actually will take pay cuts to go to a job that's more aligned to their values. They'll take pay cuts to go to jobs that are more meaningful. So we're starting to see that in the data as well. But the other thing is, and it's from a business perspective, is you're getting the best place to get that stuff is from the workplace. And the only person really that's financially incentivized to do that, to solve this problem, is the workplace, because the workplace can make their staff be healthier and happier. They're going to get high levels of engagement, high levels of productivity, high levels of innovation, which businesses need today, and they're going to hold on to people for longer. So it's a win-win to me. It's like with the business is perfectly positioned to fix this problem. The business is the one that's going to benefit from doing this, and the whole world's going to benefit if we, and business has got a wide reach. So if we can start doing it in businesses, then we're going to have a really wide reach. So that's what kind of kept pushing me over to businesses. I think it's a wide impact, and they've got money to solve the problem. And then how do we do it? Sorry, Mike, this is a long answer, isn't it? And then how do we do it? We use something called the helps method. So I started working with small businesses, just doing wellbeing workshops. Probably not massively dissimilar to what you two are explaining with your journey of learning different things. But I started off just doing wellbeing workshops, physical wellbeing. Quickly recognized that actually there's a mental health issue here, but there's also an engagement issue. If we can give people all the tips in the world about how to be healthier, like me with my first business, but if they're not engaged at work and they're not working in a way that's good for them, then they're going to burn out or not do that stuff anyway. So then I started doing research, digging into engagement and learning how to help businesses improve engagement levels. Then I started going into burnout prevention, and we kind of combined all of those together. So we have health, engagement, and we cover physical and mental health in health. Engagement, how to create an engaging environment. Leadership, which is basically making sure that your senior leadership team and your managers are actually looking after these things as well. Performance, which is making sure that people are working in a way that's sustainable and getting results without burning out. And then finally, strategy, which is what's the bigger, more meaningful, purposeful thing that the organization is working towards, which can inspire people. And I think when you get those, well, I know when you get those 5 things in place, even if you're performing just 10% better in those areas than most of the businesses, the results are exponential.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And I love the way you framed that really in your answer, is that how your personal experience kind of led you towards this, but then being able to hone in on the greatest ripple effect, I think, is massively important. But also, like, not everybody can afford to have a personal coach. And yes, that everybody can have free access to YouTube, at least in the Western world, and they can learn these things. But like you said, if you don't have all those other components, it becomes impossible to at least sustain, I believe. And I was having this conversation with somebody earlier about like what it is we do, and I see it as we're bringing together corporate wellness and well-being together, and a lot of people don't really know the difference to that. And I think you're on that same track as us in kind of what you bring to the table, because it's so easy for there to be a really healthy individual, pick them up and put them into a workplace that isn't supportive of that. Their well-being will decline massively. So we have to take care of both. And there's a lot of shaming going on within businesses and within companies that, well, it's that individual that's not looking after themselves, they're not performing well, performance review out the door. And there's not actually much responsibility being taken. And this is obviously a generalization. But I wonder if that correlates with what you're seeing in the workplace and some of the mistakes that maybe companies are making.
Yeah, I see it as just it's a new thing. This is how I see it. I don't see that. I do think there's an element of what you just said. So you've got some people that suffer with their health more than others, and there's prejudice against them. But generally speaking, if you go back in time 60 years, maybe a bit longer, what did a business have to be good at to survive and thrive? It had to be good at marketing and sales. It had to be good at admin and finance, and it had to be good at business development and product delivery. Really, that was it. And if it could do those kind of 4 or 5 things really well, you had a queue of people queuing up to work for you because there was mass poverty. The work was generally repetitive manual labor, so it didn't matter how well you looked after them, they could still do it. And things changed slowly, so it didn't matter if people wanted to be there or not. You didn't need innovation in the business. So business systems are built on that still, because that's what we did for a long time. today things have completely flipped. So the internet and the access to mass information has meant that things change rapidly now. So businesses of any shape and size have to be agile. That's a new thing for businesses. So managers no longer have to come in and just get Steve and Cheryl to press that button on the production line. They need to make Steve and Cheryl want to be at work and come up with ideas and work together well as a team. So that's a new challenge for managers. And relatively, believe it or not, it's probably the levels of general physical well-being were probably better 50, 60 years ago. Now there were still lots of issues that we needed to address, but people moved more and they ate more whole foods and they ate less processed foods. So businesses didn't have to think about engagement because of what I just talked about. They didn't have to think about well-being because jobs were relatively active. I know it was repetitive, but people certainly weren't suffering with major physical health conditions like they are today. Even in the mines doing that horrible work, they're probably fitter than we were. I know I wouldn't want to go and work in the mines, and I'm sure they have bad backs and lots of other issues, but they didn't have many of the issues that we have today because they were moving every day. And so again, the business 60, 70 years ago didn't have to think about how engaged their employees were, didn't have to think about the level of development that they were providing to their people. They didn't have to think about well-being and how to support and promote that. There are some businesses that did. I think Cadbury were incredible. There's some really cool things that they did. But generally speaking, it's just a new thing. Business is hard, isn't it? You got to manage all this stuff. You've got to manage multiple people. You've got to make all these multiple things happen. And now they've got to think about, oh man, like how are we supporting the well-being of these people? Because generally life's not supportive of well-being now if we don't want it to be. It's actually more encouraging of poor health. Yeah, of course we can live incredibly healthy lives now, but we've got to make the effort. And how do I actually make people want to be here and want to work hard? How do I create an engaging environment? And these are new things that businesses don't really understand yet. And most businesses are still relying on those old systems, and it's hard to make change happen. So I don't necessarily look at it that businesses are making mistakes. I mean, they are. The mistake is that they're not changing quick enough. But I think they're just struggling to adapt, and they need people to come in like yourselves and show them the way. Look, because most of them do want to do this. They're just scared of change, or they're too busy. They tell themselves that they're too busy to make these changes. And they also need people like yourselves and myself to come in and help them realize that actually, if you do take time out and spend some money on fixing these things, that's going to make you less busy in the future, because you're going to have less people sick, less people leaving because they're not happy, more people engaged. But if you carry on doing things the way that you are now on the old systems, it doesn't work. I mean, the most simple example of this is think about how businesses how the businesses set goals and objectives top down, because that's what worked in the Industrial Revolution period. Right? Senior leadership team paid a lot of money. Right, this will set the goals, pass it down to the managers. Managers will then distribute that into to-do lists to the teams. That doesn't work in today's business, because the people in the business know what needs to change as much as the people at the top. They're there because they want to make a difference, not just because they want to get paid. So a top-down goal setting structure doesn't work anymore. If you don't involve your teams at different levels in the strategic planning process, they're going to get miffed off because they can see how things can be done better, but nobody's listened to them. They genuinely want to make a difference, and the business is going to miss out on tons of innovation because you're not listening to the people that are actually in the business that can see how things are going wrong. So that's just one example. But then when you go into well-being, you can do the same thing. So it's just I don't see it they're making mistakes. I think they're just slow to change and scared of how to do it.
And I think you're absolutely on the money there, 100%. And I think another big thing that's important is that they are also struggling with the same issues that the rest of the team are struggling with. And I think sometimes for anybody that's listening to this podcast that perhaps is working in a company or working for someone that maybe isn't feeling particularly supported, it is going back to what you said earlier about empathy and being able to see, well, actually, do you know what? Maybe they actually don't know. Maybe they're really struggling. Maybe they're losing sleep at night, worrying about this big problem, and they don't know how to fix it. So I think you're on the money there when it comes to struggling to adapt and perhaps not doing it quick enough.
I think that couple, what you've just said there is, it's like something like last year, I don't know, I think the data's from Deloitte, actually. It is from Deloitte. So 75% of senior execs are considering leaving their jobs for a company that better supports their well-being. So that shows us that people at the very top are struggling with these issues. And there's lots of high profile cases in the last 6 to 12 months of political leaders and business leaders just burn out and just saying, I've had enough, I'm stepping down. And then it's like 43% to maybe 47% of managers are burnt out. And then like in the UK, I think it's in the Middle East, it's 15% of employees are engaged. So you've got senior execs that are burnt out, you've got managers that are burnt out and stressed, and then you've got teams that are disengaged. So you're absolutely right. It's not just that people don't care or that they're like whatever. I'm sure there are some people that are like that, but generally speaking, it's just there's this new unprecedented rate of change that everybody's going through, and nobody's quite figured it out. And you've got tons of people with low self-esteem in very senior positions who feel that they just need to deal with this on their own, and they're stressed. And it's kind of a vicious cycle, but it's also an incredible opportunity. We just got to change the way of doing things. Like the old-fashioned way is that a senior leader dealt with the problems and then leads by being strong and giving direction. Whereas actually probably what would work really well, and what will work really well in the modern world, is if senior leaders are a bit more open about the things they're struggling with, because that's going to help them prevent themselves from burning out, and it's going to open the world for opportunities. But you've got these people that have got this intense, and maybe it's worse in the Middle East, I'd imagine it is, but that's just an assumption, but people that they've got this political or societal pressure on them, maybe it's self-imposed, to not show any weakness and to fix this problem on their own. And with the change that's going on now, that's not going to lead to a good place.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right, even here in the UAE, I think one of the latest stats was 98% of every employee are experiencing at least one symptom of burnout. And people are not necessarily, and again, obviously it's a generalization, and not sharing openly the challenges, especially at a senior level. Employees are not necessarily feeling safe enough within their environment to be able to share their concerns, or feel embarrassed, or there are obviously cultural attachments to certain ways that you'd be perceived as well. So there's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of things to unpack. So this is why we're very grateful, obviously, for people like you, and we're very proud and excited to be doing the work that we're doing, because we can see how it's already creating that ripple effect. So I hope this conversation for anyone listening is really helping people to strive towards those changes, to help them speed up their rate of change towards this issue.
Yeah, I think knowing that other people suffer with it is one of the most therapeutic things that you can do, really. So hearing those stats, hearing what you've just shared, there's somebody sat there that's feeling like a really high level of stress, or they might be feeling burnt out, to hear that actually that's quite normal today. Not that that's a good thing and that we need to leave it that way, but that lots of people are going through it. That can make you feel a lot better, because you realize, okay, it's not just me in my own head torturing myself. It's like, this is actually a common societal problem that needs to be addressed.
We're in it together.
Absolutely, definitely. And I've got a bit of a thought-provoking question for you, Mike. So
I'm nervous.
This is more of a segue to wrap it up.
Yes. So what if the 85-year-old Mike from the future could come back and talk to the present day Mike? What would your message be to yourself, do you think?
Well, that's a very difficult question.
On the spot as well.
I'm more than that. Means that everything I've learned to date, because I'm 35, isn't even half of what I know at that age. That's so difficult to answer, because I feel that 85-year-old me is going to be immensely more wise than 35-year-old me. I think it will be along the lines of, give yourself permission to enjoy yourself, because I still work too hard, after everything we've talked about today. So give yourself permission to enjoy yourself more. Although I do love what I do, but I definitely work too much. I feel like one of the biggest things that I need to learn, and that I hope I would have learned by the time I'm 85, if I'm fortunate enough to get to that age, is don't get in the way of your own success. Don't let fear hold you back. Don't think glass half empty. I know there's so many more opportunities that I've missed already in my life, because I spent more time thinking on what could have gone wrong than what could have gone right. So yeah, I think it will be along those lines.
I like it. So when you're 85, we'll be back doing a podcast. Just see
Asking
exactly
you.
what that message will be and we'll compare.
My goal is if I get to 85 to still be able to do 10 pull-ups and be able to run 5k.
There you go. Yours is to get younger every year, isn't it?
Exactly. So when I'm 85, I should be able to do more than when I was in my 20s. That's
I like it. Love it. How old are you, John?
38.
Just turned on
yeah.
Tuesday.
Yes.
I'm just trying to think if we could do the 85-year-old health games together.
Sounds good to me.
There you go. It's a date. Mike,
Put it in the calendar. I'll put it in the calendar.
And I'll reach out to you closer to the time.
send you an invite. Mike, is there anything else that you would like to add to this conversation, or anything else you think that our listeners really need to hear? Any final words?
Not really. I'd just reiterate that point that I said earlier about don't put your self-esteem into what you're achieving. Put your self-esteem into how you're being and how aligned you are to your values. And for me, that's been one of the most powerful things I've ever implemented into my mindset that's helped me actually, ironically, grow my business quicker and feel happier in life. So
Nice. I love that. Amazing.
So Mike, tell people where they can find you, so our listeners where they can reach you.
yeah, so I'd say connect with me on LinkedIn, but my name's Mike Jones, so you might not find it very easy to get me. Thanks to mum and dad for making me unique. But you can find all of my social profiles on the Better Happy website, so www.betterhappy.co.uk.
Amazing. We'll put that link in the show notes along with the link to your Cadence calendar as well. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, it's been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. We've had a great time interviewing you and listening to you as well. It's always good interview when you know that it goes way past the intended time frame.
Mike, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to. We've obviously got some like projects in the work together as well. I'm really looking forward to potentially back on the podcast as well to dive in even deeper into some of that work as well. But thank you so much for what it is you're up to in the world.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the great work that you two do, and thanks for giving me a great 90 minutes.